This program is made possible in part by the Maryland Arts Council through the State of Maryland and the National Endowment for the Arts and the Howard County Arts Council through a grant from Howard County government.
Welcome to HoCoPoLitSo's The Writing Life. My name is Michael Cirelli. I'm a poet, and I'm excited and honored to be with the fabulously badass poet Kim Addonizio, and we're going to have a conversation about the writing life. And I guess the best way to start us off is to hear one of your poems. So would you like to share one?
Yeah. I'm going to read this title poem from this latest book, Lucifer at the Starlight. And I should say first this is a sonnet, and it's after George Meredith, the 19th century poet, who wrote a sonnet called Lucifer in Starlight, in which Lucifer comes up from, underground to cause trouble on earth, and he kind of gets beaten back by God and the angels. So the message is, good triumphs over evil. And
Right.
I read that and I thought, I don't think so. So I wrote my own poem in response to that. So this is Lucifer at the Starlight.
Okay.
So, Lucifer walks into a bar is the basic premise.
Okay.
Here's my bright idea for life on Earth. Better management. The CEO has lost touch with the details. I'm worth as much, but I care. I come down here. I show my face. I'm a real regular. A toast to our boys and girls in the war, grinding through sand. To everybody here, our host who's mostly missed, like methane rising from retreating ice shelves. Put me in command. For every town we'll have a marching band. For each thoroughbred, a comfortable stable. For each worker, a place beneath the table. For every forward step, a stumbling, a shadow over every starlit thing.
Nice.
So, yeah, so that's the premise of that book, basically. Devil walks into a bar. It's structured like a night at a bar.
Right.
And, but I want to hear one of your poems.
You want to hear one of my poems?
Yeah.
Well, I'll definitely read one of my poems. One thing that it makes me think of with a lot of your work is that it's rooted in kind of a realistic sense of reality, where good doesn't always prevail, and you kind of illuminate a lot of the social ills or personal emotional ills or relationship ills or whatever they may be, as opposed to sugarcoating them and making them something that we shall overcome, which seems to be the theme of a lot of poetry out there nowadays, is the we shall overcome. So I appreciate that. And I guess I'll read a poem unless you have something that you want to add to that.
Yeah,
Did I miss the mark?
No, big dark side, yeah,
Okay, yeah.
Deep dark side.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I figured, if I'm reading with you, I could, I'm like a part of the Kenneth Koch school of poetry. Sometimes I long to just write nothing but happy stuff. You know what I mean? Even though I know that I oftentimes feel like the poetry that I like the most is painful, and I feel like pain and tragedy and sorrow is so compelling sometimes, especially as a reader. And most of my favorite poets are poets that are able to kind of traverse all that stuff. But I also love a Kenneth Koch, who writes all these kind of happy, funny poems. But anyway, I try to challenge myself to kind of write about the harder stuff.
Yeah.
Maybe it's I'm the guy that doesn't like to ask the waitress for more bread at the restaurant. So I don't want anybody to feel uncomfortable. It's my whole MO. My girlfriend's always like, you will ask for bread right now. You will do it. And I'm like, no, will you ask for more bread? And I really want more bread, but I'm afraid to ask. Anyway, bread, food, we'll go here. And this is a little bit of a harder poem. This was about the last meal that I had with my biological father. And we knew he was dying. So it was kind of a weird thing sitting down with somebody, and I know you have a poem that's similar. And it was a kind of surreal moment sitting there with somebody that is physically dying. They only have a couple days left. You don't know when they're going to go. But I kind of knew that this was my last day, that I was going to have
Yeah,
a meal with my pops. And my pops loved to eat. He was a big, round guy, and I remember, you know, he kind of was like a I don't give a F type of dude. So like we walked in and to the restaurant, and there was the bar and all the tables, and then there's little couches, like waiting couches, almost just like this. And he just propped up, and it's a kind of a nice restaurant, and he had this big orange fleece on, and he's just propped up with his stomach just sitting there like, we're gonna eat right here. Like, that's what he told the waiter. I'm like, okay, I guess we're eating right here. So we're eating here, like this,
Yeah.
while there's tables in there and there's a bar right there. But anyway, the poem is called Glass Eaters. The night before he died, we ate glass. No toast, no melodrama. We knew this was our last meal together on earth, so we did what we do best. We finished the marsala, wiped it up with focaccia, polished off the broccoli rabe, the cavatelli, arancini balls stuffed with fontina, and jumbo shrimp cocktail bent around the brim of a martini glass. It was fitting that we were eating, our bellies butting against the table, to remember him with cutlery, to remember the way his mouth moved with the efficiency of a swallow's wing. It came to the table topped with 3 raspberries, powdered sugar, 2 silver spoons. We tapped the glass with the silver until it broke, our faces upside down in the spoon's parabola, and unearthed a silky custard. We crunched the glass with our teeth. We let the custard wash it all down to make it easier to swallow. So, you know.
That's beautiful, yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
True story.
Yeah. Well, you know, one of the things I was thinking about as you were reading too is the whole thing of light and dark.
Yeah.
You know, and I mean, I love funny poems too. You
Yeah.
know, and I always want to like do something that's lighter, you know, or
Yeah.
funnier, and I have those too. But sometimes it's just finding that mix, you know,
Yeah.
right? Because life is both. So
Yeah.
you know, and you can't if you spend all your time mired in the darkness. That's
Right.
that's called depression.
Yeah.
That's called
yeah,
clinical
your
depression.
Your poems have a
So,
great
yeah.
balance, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're fun, edgy, and dark, you know, and it's always, I guess that's what, you know, to talk about the writing life or writing process, it's trying to find that balance, you know. For me, you know, personally, it's always trying to tap into the balance of, you know, having the right imagery that I need, having the right idea that I need, having the right, you know, but sometimes you can't have too many of those things, I feel like, you know. So when I work with teenage writers, oftentimes, which is my job, they'll have all of these amazing lines, like one after another, and they're just like banging you over the head with like punchline after punchline.
Yeah.
You know, and one of the writing instructors at our organization named John Sands often tells them, you know, a table only needs 4 legs to stand. You know, it doesn't need 20 legs. You can't even put your legs under it if there's 20 legs. You know, and I also often tell them, you know, sometimes you have to get rid of great lines to make the other great lines shine. You know, and that's sort of, you know, ultimately the balance that I try to strike sometimes when I'm writing a poem, you know, whether it's a balance between dark and light or funny and serious or an idea versus an image.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was also thinking that you're just a really good performer. I mean, you know, watching you last night was really great to see how you just work with the audience. And I'm just wondering when you came to poetry versus performance, or did they come at the same time, or was that what attracted you first? Did you start performing and then kind of get interested in the language, or was it the other way around?
No, it was actually the former. I got involved and really kind of grew as a writer because of the poetry slam scene, ultimately. And it's an interesting thing, and there's a lot of dialogue about poetry slam and if it's good poetry, or if it's good art, if it's bad art. You know, I think who was it that called it the death of art? Maybe Garrison Keillor or one of them.
Really?
Was it Garrison? Don't quote me here, but a pretty famous critic, poetry critic, called poetry slam the death of art. Look it up on Google. I'm not sure exactly who said it. But yeah, so as a young writer, especially in the Bay Area, with such a rich tradition of oral poetry, you know, coming from the Beat generation and all of that, the poetry slam scene was just a great way to kind of get immediate feedback from your poems. You either do well in a poetry slam or you do bad, you know, and that community, oftentimes in the poetry slam, really helps push each other. Like you wanna win, you know, and it's weird to think that a competitive element would help you develop as a writer, but for me, it did. And my focus in the slam was different than a lot of people's focus, and what excited me most about poetry and writing was the language and the craft. So, and an interesting thing about that is that the better I became as a writer, the worse I did in the poetry slam. You know, so that, you know, I think slam...
That's really... Do you think that, I mean, is that telling in some way in terms of what you think the slam scene is about? Because I also came up in San Francisco, but I wasn't involved in the slam scene.
Right.
So, I mean, there was that
Right.
same, like, heritage of, like, all of this literary heritage that was there, and all
Yeah.
these different cafes and places you could go read your stuff, but
Yeah.
it wasn't that, you know.
Totally.
And so that really interests me. Like, what's the balance there between the writing and the performance? Because, you know, I mean, I kind of, when I first came to slam, I think I came to it with a bias. I'm not a slam poet, but,
Right.
you know, when I first kind of became aware of it and started watching it or being asked to judge it, you know,
Right.
I sort of thought, well, you know, they're just, you know, that's not real poetry, you know.
Yeah.
And, but it was because I hadn't heard good slam.
Exactly.
You know, and it's
exactly.
not about the genre, it's about like what you do with it.
Totally.
And then when I heard people, I was hearing people that were good performers but bad writers.
Right.
And then when I heard people that were good writers and good performers, it was
Yeah.
like a revelation to me. I went, oh wow,
Totally.
this is what this really is about, and that was really exciting.
Yeah, definitely, and that's what it is. I mean, to me, a good poem is a good poem, you know. And I've seen people go up to a poetry slam and read their poem off of paper, and it's been so mind blowing that they couldn't help but beat the guy that had a million arm movements. You
Right,
know?
right.
You know, but it's interesting, you know, because in the Bay Area, which is actually a pretty central place for the development of slam, and, you know, obviously literature in general, but the slam scene in the Bay Area is always kind of looked at as a national kind of benchmark.
Yeah.
But in the early days of slam, there were more writers that were kind of, I feel like, from the community of writers that you were involved in probably when you were a writer back in the day, and, you know, like the whole group of manic depressed type of poets. And those folks were winning poetry slams too, but they were all awesome writers, and their work was rooted in a lot of kind of the gritty fringes of Bay Area life, which, you know,
Right.
a lot of the stuff that you work in is sort of in those fringe areas,
yeah,
you know.
yeah.
So that's really interesting. Were you ever considering doing a poetry slam, or were you know, because I feel like a lot of the people, you know, that came out of the sort of San Francisco scene did slam, but now they're like, you know, Jeffrey McDaniel, for instance, teaches at Sarah Lawrence.
Right,
and,
right.
You know,
Or Patricia Smith,
Patricia
who
Smith,
was
of course.
a slam national slam champion.
Yeah.
Right.
Multiple times. You know,
Yeah.
now she's a National Book Award winner, and
Yeah.
you know, she's she's just doing amazing things with just creating forms. And, you know, her new book I just saw, I'm just reminded of this yesterday because we were part of the Blackbird Poetry Festival, and sort of modeled after, you know, the title poem of that festival, the sort of motto poem of that festival is 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird. And a lot of the student readers had 13 ways of looking at things. In Patricia Smith's new book, she has this poem called 13 on 13, and it's basically like 13 ways of looking at herself at the age of 13. And every section is 13 lines, and every line is 13 syllables. I mean, it's just like blows my mind that, like, you know, that she's creating these like new forms.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
as she's writing, and is sort of taking it to a whole new level.
Which Terrence Hayes is doing also,
Yeah,
which is
totally.
pretty interesting, like that whole intersection of
Yeah.
form, and I mean, because we think of slam being at the far end or something, or at a different end from the, quote, formal requirements of poetry, but they're so intermixed, which I guess is one thing now that's really happening. If you, you know, I mean, I think thinking about the state of poetry is almost impossible.
Right.
When people say, well, what do you think about the state of poetry today? I'm like, I have no idea. I'm just, I'm a poet. I know it from this little window, but I don't know what's going on over here. But one thing I see through my little window is that the whole thing of like oral poetry coming back has been really big. And just different kinds of things starting to really intermix that once would have at least seemed really separate, whether they ever were. I don't know, but it just seems like now there's a lot more kind of interpenetration of all those modes or ways of making poems, including, performance and now internet stuff and intertextual stuff and collaborations with other arts and all of that, which I think is really cool.
Yeah. And I mean, with the proliferation too recently of just so many small presses, there's just so many poets out there, and so it's hard to talk about the state of contemporary poetry right now because it's also so geographically based. I mean, if you look at California and the Bay Area, there's a bunch of small presses that are out there that have also, and new small presses, but then in New York, I mean, I feel like there's 10 new small presses a year that are putting out 5 to 10 new books a year. So I mean, there's just so many poets, and it's a good thing, and I think it's got its positives and negatives, because it feels like, you don't have to work as hard to get a book put out nowadays. It's like, oh yeah, my friend has this press out of Williamsburg, and I'm cool and I'm hip and they like my new poem about, Starship Troopers, and so now I'm going to put my book about Starship Troopers out, which is really cool. I like conceptual books. I'd love to read that book. I don't think anybody wrote it. I'm not talking about anybody in particular.
Well, maybe you have to write it after
Starship Troopers.
The Jersey Shore book. What's the name of that book?
Everyone Loves the Situation.
Yeah. I've never seen the show.
Yeah.
But I think it's really interesting that you took on that project.
It's a complex show, it definitely is the most popular show in MTV history, and it was something that struck a chord with me because the characters, like I've said before, kind of resemble my cousins and family members. And it was also interesting to me to kind of be part of academic Italian-American circles who are condemning it so much, and then part of just blue-collar working class Italian-American circles who, are just living that life, So I wanted to try to reconcile it, find some humanity in it, and it's an interesting thing. I love writing conceptual work, as you do as well. It's really cool.
Yeah. So how's that working? I mean, in terms of audiences, because that's something that really interests me. Is sort of like, because you and I both do different kinds of. I mean, it doesn't sound either of us exactly had the traditional whatever that is. Path to poetry. I mean, we didn't go to certain schools. We didn't, grow up with it in our environment in any way. We both sort of found it. It seems later, or it found us maybe more accurately, But so I'm kind of interested in the whole audience thing and who we're writing for and reading to, because we both, I think, read to a lot of different kinds of audiences, and sometimes, I have trouble kind of sussing out sometimes who are these people and what do they expect from me and what what do they think poetry is and what do they think I'm going to do when I get up there, and it's sometimes all I really want to do is like connect with them, but sometimes it's hard to know like which poems are going to connect and what people are going to sort of get from it.
I mean, that whole idea of audience is just such a weird abstract thing, but and I'm sure you feel this way similarly at times, is ultimately your audience starts to kind of define itself in a lot of ways, in that for me, and this is also good and bad, I can get kind of pigeonholed by my audience or by what people expect out of my writing. So my first 2 books deal heavily with hip-hop, and that's on a personal level because I grew up with hip-hop, a child of the hip-hop generation, and also because I'm around teenagers all the time, and I'm just totally compelled and mesmerized by the language that comes out of hip-hop. But I oftentimes get coined as a hip hop poet. You know,
yeah.
and I don't know what that means. You know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the interesting thing about audience is, you know, when I write a poem, I definitely am conscious of the fact that I don't want to be too insider. Say if I'm writing a hip hop poem or a poem about the Jersey Shore, like I hope that you can read the Jersey Shore poem, the Jersey Shore book, and not have to have ever seen an episode to, you know, be able to enjoy it or get something out of it. And you know, one of the biggest compliments I ever got was it was at Dodge 2 years ago, and the person that was running the tent where they sell all the books, you know, said to me, he was just, you know, he came up to me, he was like so surprised. It's like, you know, I've never seen such a diverse group of people buying your books. Like, you have tons of teenagers coming and buying your books, but you also have like old people buying your books, and what look like the professor types buying your books, and what look like my grandparents buying your books, and middle-aged people, and hipsters, and hip-hop heads, and like, so that's kind of cool. And I guess that's, you know, one of my goals as a writer to, you know, I want to, even if I write a hip-hop poem, I want David Lehman, you know, who was my advisor, I want him to be able to understand it.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
So,
yeah.
you know, and that's interesting to be able, I mean, what, you know, I feel like you probably have an idea of what your kind of audience is. You know, how would you describe your audience, or who you write for, other than maybe yourself?
Yeah, yeah, myself and strangers, Gertrude
Right.
Stein, right?
Right.
But I mean, I really think about that too, because like I'm doing a lot more stuff now that's a lot more allusive, where you know, I'm quoting lines from other poets, only tweaking them in some way, and all that, and yet I want to, you know, I want people to be able to follow it, you know, and yet I know that I'm leaving out some people who aren't going to get that stuff.
Yeah.
But I guess, so I think you're right. Part of it, in a way, your audience does kind of start to self-select, and you can't reach everybody, and that's okay.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
I think my impulse is sort of like, I want to reach everybody.
Yeah.
And then I realize, well, I can't do that, and it's not for everybody what I do.
Right.
You know,
Right.
and that's why it's art, right?
Yeah.
Is because like it's going to be like the right fit for some people and not for others, you know. But I think I want the same thing you want, which is to, you know, to put some stuff there that, like, if somebody's into that, they're going to get that other level. But you want there to be something there for just, you know, I mean, somebody who's just an intelligent person that's like interested in words or wants to hear something, you know, interesting and maybe compelling in some way.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's pretty important.
I mean, that's exciting.
Yeah.
You know, to me as a writer, that's the most exciting thing.
Yeah.
To say something smart, you know.
Do you want to read another poem?
Sure. Let me. Seeing that we're speaking about kind of art and insider outsider status, you know, I mentioned a lot of people, and it's funny. I read this poem the other night at a reading for the 100th issue of the Hanging Loose magazine. And it's a pretty literary community, and they're a bunch of kind of art lovers, and they're all kind of art snobs, you know, no diss on them, you know, and they've been in the literary community for a long time, you know, and so this was a fun poem to read for them because they knew every single reference, whereas when I read this to high school kids the other day, you know, they didn't laugh at any of the little or chuckle or really even connect with, you know, so that's an interesting kind of dichotomy. But this poem is called Dinner Party, and it's about Gertrude Stein's used to host these dinner parties for all these artists. Reminds me of that Midnight in Paris. Have you seen that Woody
Allen? Yeah.
Beautiful movie. So I'll read the poem. Dinner Party. When Gertrude Stein hosted her famed Saturday night dinner parties at 27 Rue de Fleur, it was said that she would hang paintings by each guest across from where she seated them at her long, wooden French table. So while Renoir buttered a dinner roll across from his luncheon of the boating party, Braque sipped Bordeaux till his muse nearly walked off the canvas. Matisse slurped Alice B. Toklas's lentil soup in front of a portrait of himself, and Cezanne sliced liver, bird's eye, to apples and oranges. Picasso even sat across from a Picasso. At my dinner party, I drive a nail through a basketball to hang in front of Seth's seat and saw a hole in the wall across from Frank's. For Donna, I scribble 1,000,000 signatures over the mantle, and for Hershon, I install a spigot that pours newsprints. The pots are simmering on the stove, custard setting in the fridge, hot bread rising like hot bread in the oven. Across from Sarah's, I'm stumped. I fish the heart from my chest and try to decide whether to pin it to the wall or add it to the stew. So, you know.
Great.
Well, I'd like to hear a poem by you.
Cool. Okay,
Yeah.
I think I'll read another sonnet,
Awesome.
actually, from an earlier book. And this is called So What? And, you know, speaking of references, like this book, what is this thing called Love? You know, there are people that know that's a Cole Porter tune.
Yeah.
And people that don't, and like,
Right.
you know, but what the great thing is you can introduce audiences to things too when you read things. So, I mean, I've done poems and I say Lush Life, and they look at me like,
Right.
what's that?
Right.
You got to know these people. You
Yeah.
got to know Coltrane. You got, you know,
Yeah.
so you can turn people on to things, which is great. So I'll read this sonnet called So What? Guess what? If love is only chemistry, phenylethylamine, that molecule that dizzies up the brain's back room, smoky with hot bebop, it won't be long until a single worker's mopping up the scuffed and littered floor, whistling tunelessly, each endorphin cooling like a snuffed glass candle, the air stale with memory. So what, you say? Outside, a shadow lifts a trumpet from its case, lifts it like an ingot, and scatters a few virtuosic riffs toward the locked-down stores. Quit believing that there's more, but you're still stirred enough to stop and wait, listening hard. So I think we're about out of time, but this has been really great to talk to you. Michael Cirelli, a fabulously badass poet, and I'm Kim Addonizio, and thanks for joining us for HoCoPoLitSo's The Writing Life.